All right, gentlemen, are you ready for another night of training, becoming competent and confident speakers? Yeah. All right, good. Now, tonight we'll begin with having a look at our delivery. How about delivering it? But to do that, as I've been doing, I'm going to go ahead and put it on screen share. There we go. So as we've seen, this journey to becoming a competent and confident communicator, speaker, involves a step-by-step process of continual learning, speaking, improving, learning, speaking, improving. This is the way we become competent and confident in our speaking. Now, I've been sharing with you the steps I use that I've developed for myself for preparing my speeches. And as I told you, I just suggest you use it as a starting place and then adapt it to however you want to have things. Now, for me, these steps include these things for preparing a speech: creating the content, practicing the delivery, and then giving the speech. So last time we finished our look at creating content. And today we will begin looking at the steps involved in practicing the delivery. Now, it's important to remember from the last training that you should continue to work on fine-tuning the words you're using in your speech as you practice saying it. And while you're doing that, while you practice saying it, really focus on getting comfortable with the words and knowing them and just saying them over and over so that you really are familiar with them. Now, this part, as far as knowing the words, you will work on this the whole time while you're practicing your delivery. But I find the best way to practice getting to know the words is to do it in chunks. Like doing this. You start off with the opening and you get that opening down really good. Then you do your closing and get that down really good. And then you practice doing opening and closing a few times till you see that you're really comfortable with both of them, doing them at the same time. Then you go and work on point one and get really comfortable with that. And then go to opening, point one, closing. Then add point two, get good with that. And then, do the whole thing, opening, closing, point one, point two, closing. And then do finally the point three or how many points you have, get comfortable with that. Then go opening, point one, point two, point three, closing. And you'll have a lot of time practicing your opening and closing, so you should have those down very well. Now we move on to the question that a lot of people ask. Should you memorize a speech? Well, yes and no. My advice is that you memorize the opening and closing, just get those down totally. But for the body, focus on getting really familiar with it, knowing it inside out, but not necessarily word for word. But however, have to understand that a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't do that at all because it'll be too fake, too mechanical. Well, is that really true? Because don't actors who perform in theater, they say the same words over and over every time, but they don't look fake because they've learned the importance of delivery. The problem with us when we memorize the words is we just memorize them just enough, but they internalize them. And if we could get to the point where we internalize all the words, it would make our speeches much easier to say. Now, when I first started out, I tried memorizing the words, but here's what happened. I didn't practice enough. And so I'd get to a point where I'd forget, and then I'd get lost because I had to know each word in a row. So that was not very good. After that, I started really getting the ideas and concepts down really well so that if I did forget something, it didn't stop me from continuing on. Now, what should you focus on as you practice your delivery? The first thing you want to do is focus on using your body, then your voice. I have discovered there's one more thing that's critical to really helping you do an excellent job in delivering a speech. and that is learning how to use your heart. Now, with that, I mean how to love with your heart, how to express emotions. When we do a speech, we do have to use our heads because we have to know the words. But if we don't know the words very well, we're focused so much on just our heads and thinking about the words. But we want to have it internalized good enough so that we can speak also from our heart. And that will give you more dynamic kind of delivery with people. Your emotions will be better. Everything you do will come off more authentic. And so using your heart is critical and it's foundational, I think. Now, while these are the main things that we're going to focus on, there are other things to consider. Like what? Well, using props. Nowadays, it's been very popular in Toastmaster contests that everybody uses props for their speeches. And I think the majority of people do it. But a couple of years ago in the international speech, the guy who won it, he didn't use any props at all. So it's not critical. And the worst thing you could do is use a prop just to use a prop. Make sure it really adds to the speech. But it could be something nice and helpful to your speech. Then you have dealing with fear. And this is an issue that we have to deal with as we're preparing for speaking and before we go up. Like usually when you're first starting to do speeches in public, your adrenaline's pumping, you're nervous, you're thinking about, oh, am I going to do okay? Am I going to blow it? There's all kinds of things going on. And you're dealing with the audience, and it can just be kind of frightening for some people. Well, most of us, at least it was for me. But as you do more speeches, it'll get easier. And I've learned things about like how you breathe in deeply and let it out slowly for several minutes before you speak. And also having different mantras in your mind where you say like, I'm excited, I'm gonna have fun, I'm gonna change the world. You could use any kind of mantra you want, but I'm saying those things to myself before I go up. And it's good to say, I'm excited, rather than going, oh my gosh, I'm scared, I'm nervous, what's gonna happen? No, be positive, I am excited. Are you excited? Right. Then there's the issues of what you do right before you speak. And we'll talk about some of those in a little bit. But here's the thing, like coming early enough to get your technology all set up, make sure everything's working, getting familiar with the place, maybe meeting whoever's in charge of the event if you're speaking at some event. But it's just coming in time that you can relax and you don't have to rush at the last second if something goes wrong. But those are all good. But for today, we're focusing mainly on using your body. Now, more specifically, nonverbal communication, body language, the use of gestures, having stage presence. Now, how important are these things to public speaking? Let me share with you 3 quotes to show the importance of this. Now, this is by Angie Arresigado. Here's what she said. No one should ever underestimate the importance of public language, of body language, in public speaking and presentations. Give off the wrong vibes and you'll end up pushing your audience away. But with the right body language, you can just as easily win them over. Then by Gary Gennard, and I really like his blog, and he used to be an actor and he teaches actors, and he has a lot to say about body language, so his is a good blog to look at. Data may be essential, but it's almost never powerful enough by itself to persuade and build trust. What you show matters as much and sometimes more. Then our last quote by Sophia Thompson. Body language is an essential part of public speaking success. Your nonverbal cues will impact on the way your message is received, how engaged your audience is, and what they think of you as an individual. Now, here are some statistics that have been around since the 1970s based on some research, and you hear them quoted all the time. They're saying as far as what impacts an audience, they say 55% of what impacts the audience is the use of the body. Then 38% is the use of the voice and the tone of the voice. And only 7% is the actual words you say. Over time, some people would disagreed with these findings, but guess what? Recent research done on TED Talks, where they rated TED Talks, where people would rate TED Talks, they'd look at it with no audio at all, with no sound, and then they'd look at it with sound. And guess what? The ratings were no different between with sound or no sound. So it tells you we are visual creatures. And that's not surprising because our visual cortex is way bigger than our auditory cortex. So what we take in really has an impact on us. And so body language is important. Also, the research discovered as well that nonverbal behaviors have a huge impact on the audience's first impressions of the speaker. Now, viewers decide if they like a TED Talk within the first 7 seconds. And those impressions have very little to do with the words the speakers say. Isn't that interesting? It's not the words, it's our actions, even though we are speaking there to speak. So again, we see that this is very important. Now, I have discovered that the first impressions can happen even before you start speaking. You know, one time I did a training at Pentalog here in Brasov. And before I came early and got everything set up, and then there was kind of like a break for everybody in the offices. There was like their break time. And that was right before I was going to speak. And so they were all up in the area where I was speaking. So I went around and introduced myself and talked to them and asked them about themselves and asked them what they think about public speaking and that. And man, that had a huge impact. When I started, I already had friends and they were connecting with me and they were very positive throughout it. So there's things we can do before we speak like this that can have a huge impact on our connection with people and the impressions we make. And sometimes, you know, our stage presence, how we look and impress people, starts the moment we walk into the room. And even when you're walking up to speak. So all of those things people are taking in, they create that first impression. So remember that. Now, when it comes to our bodies, what should we do when speaking? Before we look at that, to the answers to that, I want to say this. When it comes to telling stories, the things I'm going to share with you after this point, or after I'm going to say this right now, the things I'm going to share, the things I'm sharing, when it comes to stories, they don't apply. You can use your body to help tell stories in ways that would otherwise not be good to do. Like example, having a closed body position. Okay? That's not a good thing to do. But in your story, if you said, oh, I was out in the cold and I was shivering, it was minus 40 degrees. That fits in with the story. So how we use our bodies for stories is different from doing regular speeches or giving information. So remember that. So what should we do with our bodies? Number one, smile. We should smile. See, smiling is critical to making and maintaining a connection with your audience. It opens them up to you. Now, what happens is when we're first starting out, we tend to, like you see, people will do, like they'll be thinking what they're saying next and they look up here at the ceiling or they look down at the ground. But you want to keep your eye contact on with your audience all the time when you're speaking. What else is helpful? Eye contact, right? I kind of get mixed up here. I said that before. I've seen 2 slides here. But anyway, so eye contact, like I said, it's important. It helps establish the trust and how you're looking at them, making that connection establishes trust. And like I just said for being mixed up, it's that keeping eye contact with people all the time that's important. Here's something else, people. This next one is probably one of the ones people use the least, and it's one of the most important. And that is using facial expressions. they help us to express our emotions and state of mind. See, this guy, to me, he looks a little confused, maybe even a little scary. And there's one other thing he's doing that can really help communicate during the speech, and that is doing head tilts. Do you understand what I'm saying? So these are things that can help. These are really good for connecting and expressing emotions. But here's one of the key things we need to do. We need to start from the neutral position, which means we have our hands down at our sides, relaxed. We're not wiggling our fingers or shifting our weight around. We have a solid stance. Our feet are shoulder width apart. We have a good posture, and we're not moving around, and not our heads either. Now, I'm doing virtual speeches, looking at the camera. I see most people tend to move their heads a lot when they're speaking, but we don't seem to do that as much when we're in person. So I find that kind of interesting. So learning in virtual speeches to try to keep your head still. And when I've been watching the video of these trainings, I see myself doing a lot of moving around, and I still have to work on that. So neutral position, head still, smiles, open position. These are things that you would start with. You don't want your arms in front of you. Keep it open. Another thing you want to do is not to point with your finger at your audience unless you're telling a story where you say, you're in trouble. Most of the time, what you want to do is have your palms up and point like this to your audience. This is warm to them. This is open to them. Much better than this. So use palms up when you're pointing to your audience. You understand what I'm saying? Then, so you have your hands down the side, you do your gesture, then bring your hands back down to your side. A lot of times people keep their arms bent, kind of like a T-Rex, or maybe even like they're holding a remote. And so they keep one arm bent the whole time. And when I see that, I imagine they have a towel on their arm and they're a butler. So you know what? The remote can actually work with your hands down. Oh, I just did it. It worked. Now, how you use the speaking area is important too. So a lot of times people will just stand in one place the whole time, or they'll just walk back and forth. And it doesn't really have anything to do with their speech. And if they keep going back and forth, they kind of look like a tiger in a cage. And so you don't want to do that. You want your movements to help communicate your message. So they should be purposeful when you do them. Now say, if you're going to do something where you're going to do kind of a timeline speech, like past, present, and future, you want to start at your right side, which is the opposite for what you actually would do if you were doing it for yourself. But you have to think from the audience's perspective. So you start on your right. This is the past, present, and future. Also, you could use this. This was the problems of the past. This is the solution. So there's different ways of using the area. Or you could start with first point, second point, third point. But don't just stay in one spot the whole time. And I recommend that you open and close, as long as it's appropriate, in the middle, and then move around. For me, when I'm doing contests and talking to bigger audiences, I'm standing in the middle of the room. Then I go halfway to the point over here, and I stand there. So that's my first point, then second point, then I go halfway to the end on this side, and that's my third place to stand. So that's how I divide up the speaking area when I'm speaking. Now, how we use our bodies is either going to help us or it's going to hinder us. So what are some of the ways our bodies can hinder our message? And I've shared these already, but we're reinforcing them. Closed positions, where you're putting a barrier between you and your audience. It could be like, I'm scared, or I need protection. Or it can be distracting actions. Again, it could be like the shifting of weight like this, wiggling your fingers down at the side, doing little small hand movements when your hands are down, or playing with your hair if you have some, or keep adjusting your glasses every couple seconds. These are kind of things that are distracting, and they have nothing to do with your message. Then you have purposeless gestures. They kind of fit with distracting, but distracting ones would be more like you keep noticing them. They're like, why is he doing that? And purposeless gestures are just things you do like talking with your hands where they really don't help express the meaning of your message. If you're talking with your hands the whole time, it means nothing. And again, the same with walking, as I said. If you're just walking back and forth, that's purposeless. That doesn't help your message. So what is the opposite of these? Open positions, deliberate actions, and purposeful gestures. These are the things you want to do when you're speaking, that everything's intentional that you're doing. Now, when we do this, how does it help our messages? Well, it helps us to connect with people. If we have good eye contact and smiles and open position, this is open. This makes for connection with people. If we want to express confidence, the smiles and the eye contact help, but also a solid stance where we're not wiggling our fingers or hands or doing nervous things. This expresses confidence to people. And then when we're using purposeful gestures, they help us to communicate our message. They help us to engage the audience, to help them understand the message. So what we want to go from here is understanding this, that the way we use our bodies can add meaning and depth to what we're saying. It can help keep our audience engaged with what we are saying, and it can increase our ability to influence them. So when should we use gestures? When should we use movements and body movements and anything else that helps to communicate our message, like the facial expressions and the like? When should we do that? When we want to emphasize a key idea, or to show action words, to show verbs. We have verbs in our speech. We have actions we're talking about. We want to be able to express those in our speeches, or to help tell stories, because that really makes the stories more engaging when you move. Now, here's an example of a key idea from a speech I did. It was a quote, and it was this: "Our fears establish the limits of our lives." So that helped to communicate the key idea. And then for an action word, here's an example. Open yourself up to the possibility of change in the coming year. So these are ways we can use our body. And even like when you tell questions or something, you have this quizzical look and you go, what is going on? So using your body to help communicate the message in those ways. Now, how should we go about practicing our delivery? Well, you need to begin by figuring out how to use the speaking area while getting comfortable with the words. Remember, you're always going to be working on the words, but now we're talking about the body. So the first thing you want to do is figure out how are you going to use the speaking area to have purpose and meaning in what you're saying, and figure out how to do that. Then once you have that figured out and you practice saying the words as you move, then you want to work on getting your gestures and other movements down. And once you get those down, then you want to move on finally to using your voice and how to use it to impact your audience. Now, what I recommend to people when they do their first speech, not the icebreaker, but after that, is to spend 2 weeks practicing the delivery. The first week to practice getting comfortable with the words, getting the speaking area down, and getting the gestures and movements down. So getting basically the body movements down. And then the second week to add the voice and what you're going to do with your voice to help engage the audience. It's not that you just work on the voice by itself. No, you're adding it. You're still doing the body gestures, but now you're adding the voice and getting the variety, the pauses, and everything else that's in with the voice, which we will look at next time. Now, we have 2 different ways now that we can use our bodies when speaking. One, when we're before a live audience in person, face-to-face. And when we speak to a virtual audience. A year ago, we didn't even talk about this. But with coronavirus, now we're doing this, right? So we have to use we don't see an audience. We have our webcam now, and that's what we have to look at. Now, the key things you want to do when you're doing a virtual speech is, first of all, you should stand up when you're giving a speech online. It's still good to do that. And I really have made a difference for me standing to do these trainings. But the key things are, you need to frame yourself within the screen so that your people can see you. And you don't want to be where you're just a little bit of the screen in the screen. You want to fill up most of the screen with just a little bit of space above you. Now, you're going to have to look occasionally at the screen to see if you're framing yourself okay. But most of the time, you should be looking at the camera, because that's how you make eye contact with your audience. Because when they're looking at you, they see you as you look at the camera. See? If I'm talking to you right now like this, I'm making no connection with you. But now, there's connection. Now, also, so look at the camera, then you have to smile. And some of you guys, you know who I'm talking about. You need to get better at this. So when you get ready to speak, smile right at the beginning. Get some connection with your audience. Let them see that you're interesting and fun to listen to. So as you start, what do? You frame yourself, you look at the camera, and you smile as you begin to speak. Can you do that? Okay, and you should smile not all the time, but you should do it throughout the speech. Now, I'm going to share with you a few examples that I found on how to frame yourself. Now, the first one is not necessarily dealing with a speech, but it's if you're sitting at a desk. Here's a good way to frame yourself if you're sitting at a desk, where you can see the hands, and there's still a little bit of space above the head. This is a good way to look if you can do that. Now, sometimes the challenge is our setups in our homes don't make it easy to do that. For me, I would have to move my desk out and put something behind it to move the camera back so I could see my hands on my desk. Okay, here's another one of standing where it's just a little bit below the chest. And this can be a good one as well, a good way when standing of how to look, how to frame yourself. But there's also this one, where you go down to a little bit below your hips, so you're getting to where you can do more movement and people can see more of you. If you really have like an exciting speech, or you have things that you really want to use your body with, then you probably want to do more like this than like sitting down. Now, next, I want to show you a couple of screenshots from the Toastmasters World Championships this year. They were virtual, right? No one could get together. And I would highly recommend that you go to Toastmasters International YouTube channel, and they have the first 3 places on there, and you can watch them. And you can see how these people did it. But let me share a few screenshots from them. Now, this is Mike. He was the world champion. He was voted the best. See, he had a nice smile, good eye contact, and he was, in most of the screen, a little bit above his head. And then he was expressive with his emotions. I think he moved his hands just a little bit fast. I couldn't remember for sure, but we have to be careful about that. If we do it too fast, it's blurry. And he used props in his speech. So that was good. Then we had our second place person, Linda. She basically stayed almost the whole time in the same spot, but she used her body well. And then she also had these signs that she used to help tell her speech. Then the third place person, Lindy, she was very expressive with her face and using her body. And so she would be far away, and just a little bit, a few seconds after this, she moved in and was really getting into what she was talking about and really trying to connect with the audience. Notice, good eye contact still. And she still has a little bit of room above her head. So this just gives you a few examples, but to learn more, go look at the videos, and that will help you a lot. So that gives you a few ideas on what to do. Now, I'm going to send you a PDF with links to learn more about the things we looked at, plus even a few things we didn't look at, like Here's one, getting your words down. That's something will be good. How to use your body. And then virtual delivery. And believe me, there's more links on some of these than I'm showing you now, but they're there to help you. You use them as you see fit. And don't try to read them all at the same time, but over a few speeches or a handful of speeches, take the time to continually be learning things. So here's a question that many people ask. How do you get to the point where using your body looks natural? You thought about that? It's very easy. The answer is easy. Here's what you do. Practice, practice, practice. That's how you become natural. Some people say if you practice too much, you look fake. Again, actors in theatrical plays, they practice a lot and they don't look fake. So the idea is that you learn how to deliver and you learn how to use your voice and your body. And you just don't go through the motions. See, that's the problem. When people start looking fake, it's because they've stopped working and they're just going through the motions. Again, the secret is using your heart, okay? Now, I can tell you from doing the contest speeches when I've made it to district and I've done the same speech over 2 months, that I really internalized the speech so I just knew it inside out. And man, that is a good feeling. Most of the time in our speeches for pathways, we don't ever experience it because most people don't put in much time. They do enough to be good enough, but they don't do enough to be great. So the challenge is to try to push yourself to spend more time practicing. But I understand there's a limit to how much time most people have. But the practice is important. And here's a saying that I've shared before in Toastmasters in our club that might help you to remember the importance of this. And it's this: proper preparation prevents poor performance. Try to say that 3 times really fast, okay? Proper preparation prevents poor performance. So why should you put in the effort to become a competent and confident speaker? Let me share another quote with you by Phil Chandler. Becoming a confident, competent public speaker can be truly life-changing experience. It can swiftly open doors that you would otherwise be pushing against for months or years. It will get you noticed and appreciated in ways you may never have thought possible. It will attract people to you who may otherwise never have noticed you. Here's what I can tell you. This is true. I have experienced these things. Being good at public speaking can change your life as you change the world. So that's our look at how to use our bodies when delivering a speech. Let's move on to finish our time together with some Q&A about what we covered in this training. Let me stop here. Okay, gentlemen, if you want to open your mic when you talk, please have any questions for me?
I would have, sir.
Okay.
What is the best prop you have ever used in your huge experience in this field?
Well, I don't know. That's not a question you can really answer because every speech is different. Okay, I did this one speech where I talked about looking at life as a cup half full or half empty, and I said, no, we should look at neither of those. We should think of getting a bigger cup. And so I pulled out this huge glass stein, okay? And I pulled it out. This is what we want to do, right? So I'm trying to think, what other kind of props have I used? I haven't used props a lot, but most of them have been things like that. Like in my next speech, I'm going to talk about my cookies, okay? But I'm not going to make the cookies, but I'm going to have I'm going to print one of the photos of it so I have the cookie here for people to look at, okay? So thinking of what things you can use, but like I said, it has to connect really with what you're saying. Because I have seen people use props and I had no clue why they used them, okay? So if it helps tell your message, use them.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions? Peter, maybe?
How would you recommend people practice smiling more?
Yes, but like I said, though, the real secret is learning to speak from the heart. And as you do that, as you learn that, it just happens. It just flows. I mean, that's the way I can, how I've experienced it. Maybe it'll be different for you. But when I started, everything was in my head. You know, I was just so focused on what I was saying and how I was moving that it was hard to really think about the emotions, okay? Or to think about the smiling. But as I got to the point where I practiced more and I really started getting those basic things down to where I was comfortable with them, it gave me some freedom to really open up from the heart. But you have to understand, I have an advantage over most people, not necessarily you, but I worked with little kids for a long time in my life. And you have to be kind of energetic and dynamic with kids. And I can't, you're.
I muted as there was some background noise coming in just now in the hallway downstairs. But thanks for the tip. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody's different on this, Peter. We come from different backgrounds and how our cultures are. So, but we all know that if you're more emotional, more connecting with people with your voice and your emotions, that people engage much better with you, right? I mean, if someone's sitting there and they're talking and they're monotone and they're not showing emotion, pretty soon you're like, as you watch them, you know, it's just like, oh man, this guy's putting me to sleep.
Yeah.
And I've noticed a lot of change in you from when you first joined Toastmasters. So
There's been some improvement, I'd say. Look, this is nice. This is Buddy. This is using
is this
Buddy.
typing?
Hello. Hello.
Okay, so any other questions? If not, we can close up and have some time to talk after.
I would have another one.
Okay.
You have been talking about the first impression, about talking before the meeting and so on and so on. But I would like to ask you about when would be the good moment about thinking about what we wear, or about grooming, look nice when we talk, even when we are in informal meetings, or maybe just in the club or something like that. Can we practice this? Is this important?
Yes. You know what? I didn't really even think about that for this training, but it is. That's another thing that's important overall in delivering a speech, is how we look. And as a general rule, what they recommend, most of the things I've read, is say, try to dress no more than one step above your audience, okay? Don't get, like if you're with little kids, you don't need to wear a suit, would be an example. But like in the club, I would say, you know, you still kind of, for me, a lot of times I have actually even worn a tie depending on the kind of speech I was given. If I wanted to be serious, I had a tie. But most of the time it's just a dress shirt with an open collar like this. These are the kind of things I think are okay in our club. But it would depend on where you're speaking. At certain conferences, well, let's put it this way, at the contest, I dress up a lot more, okay? But you don't have to. Some people don't, right? But I at least wear a sport coat with a dress shirt when I'm competing at the divisional and the district at the higher levels. At the area, I don't worry about it as much, or the local club. But when I get up to the higher levels, I definitely dress up. And if you look at the people that compete at the international competition, the final, the world championship, they're all dressed pretty nice.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Well, I hope this was helpful in some way. We went over a lot, but you'll have the video, and then I'll make a PDF of the slides with notes. And just take your time to look through it and really think about these things as you start practicing your next speech. Because the only way you will actually learn this stuff is to use it. And as you use it, it'll become more internalized. And over time, it'll get easier and easier. The first couple speeches take a lot of work. But like I said, once you start developing good habits, then the time it takes you to do these things really shortens down. But you have to discipline yourself to work hard, especially at the beginning. So with that, next time, we'll look at the voice and see how that helps us. With that, adios, amigos.